Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hands-on Lab Guided Workshop. This particular workshop is going to be focused on the vRealize Operations Manager. And in particular, we're going to be concentrating on the lab numbers 2201-01, where we're getting started with Operations Manager. So let's go ahead and dive into this session. From an agenda standpoint, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. I'm going to talk about how we actually build the labs out to provide them to you. And I will walk you a little bit through the lab experience itself and how to navigate around there. And I'm going to speak about the first couple of modules in this particular lab, just to get you started. Let's go ahead and dive in. So again, my name is Frances Wong. I am a staff cloud partner solution architect with VMware. I've been with VMware for about 5 years. In my current role, I actually work with all of our largest North American partners when it comes to the VMware cloud on AWS and also the other hyperscalers. And with HCX in particular, as that particular solution bridges both the on-premise and the cloud instances of VMware. Now, prior to my role of working with the partners, I actually worked directly with customers, both on the commercial side and the enterprise side with VMware. And before I came to VMware, I actually was an admin and an architect in Silicon Valley for 15 years. Here I have a couple of photos of my son that I had to bring with me into the data center. And that is me on top of the racks on the same data centers. They're doing some cabling, as you can see. So I have a lot of experience running data centers. And with regards to hands-on lab, I have actually been a part of the hands-on lab program for several years now and have written several hands-on lab myself. In particular, I've written vRealize Automation 8X, CodeStream, vRealize Log Insight, and now vRealize Operations Manager. Now, changing gears a little bit about Operations Manager. Operations Manager is very much a key piece of the VMware vRealize Cloud Management Suite. It is the main tool that we use to pretty much manage the health of our virtual infrastructure. So this particular lab is going to walk you from the beginning, and we will not expect that you have any prior experience with Operations Manager. So let's talk a little bit about what it took to build this environment. So all of our lab environments are live environments. They are not simulations. There are some simulations that are part of this particular lab because there is some data that we're just not able to put into these on-demand labs. But all of these labs run live. Now, one of the things that is unique about these labs is that they are actually managed and supported by VMware. They are not done by a third party. And all the folks that write these labs, myself included, we're volunteers. This is not a part of our regular day job. This is something that we do on the side to give back to our community because we feel that we are best represented in terms of the community that we're representing. Now, these labs on the cloud management side are going to be all inclusive of the cloud management portfolio, meaning all of the portfolio will be represented in what we call vPod. So here you see a screenshot. There's actually two screenshots here. They look like they're one, but they're two screenshots that demonstrates to you that there are ESXi hosts in this environment, as well as a number of VMs that we have populated in order to not only run the lab itself and provide Operations Manager, but to provide a workload in which you can actually use during these exercises. So a lot of work has gone into building these labs. We start very early. Usually we start with the latest build of Operations Manager in this instance, and we started this effort perhaps the first quarter of the calendar year of 2021. So we've been building these labs out. We use real world experience. That's the reason why we have volunteers from the field actually build these labs, because we talk to our customers and our partners, and we know how a lot of you are using the product and what you're using the product for. So the modules are built and outlined based on what we see our customers use Operations Manager the most for. So we've built this lab to be able to reflect those activities that you find most valuable from Operations Manager. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the content of this particular lab that Greg and I wrote here. So you see there's actually 7 modules. Each of them takes roughly 15 to 30 minutes. I won't be talking about modules 5, 6, and 7. We'll talk about the primary ones, 1, 2, and 3, 4, in order to get you acclimated to the vRealize Operations Manager interface. So there's a lot of time spent actually on that first module from an overview standpoint. As I said previously, we don't expect you to have any prior experience with vRealize Operations Manager. So we're going to spend the first module basically getting oriented to where all the functions are located within Operations Manager itself. Then the following 3 modules are going to go through the most popular use functions of Operations Manager from our customers' standpoint. And those are going to be performance tuning. So you're looking for VMs that are sized too large for its workload, or those that are sized too small. Then we move into capacity and cost management. This is where you're modeling the workloads for additional VM workloads that you may want to add into your environment, or perhaps you're facing a tech refresh and you're wanting to model the new hardware in your current environment. And the last module I'm going to talk through is actually the troubleshooting hosts and VMs in particular. You can troubleshoot other virtual objects within Operations Manager, but the most common ones that our customers reach for is really trying to get a hold or trying to understand what the host is feeling or seeing, and also how the VMs are behaving and what around them from a context standpoint might be impacting those virtual constructs. So these are the 4 modules that I'm going to speak a little bit at length on. And this is actually a screenshot capture from the actual hands-on lab. And you can see this is overweight on module 1 in order to really get you used to the interface and point out where everything is and how to reach the various functions. So it's really about navigating and knowing how to get back to the home screen and find the different functions. Module 2 is actually an interactive simulation. We weren't able to populate the data consistently in the on-demand version of this lab, so we had to do a simulation in order to bring you through that. Capacity and cost management is a fun exercise. If you are trying to model or do exercises in your environment, trying to figure out how much of the workload, how much more of the workload you can fit in, how much longer you have at your current growth trajectory, or what it's going to do to your environment if you add hosts, then this is the module that you want to review in how to configure that. And lastly, if you've got some trouble spots and you want a better view of what the host is experiencing or what the VM is experiencing, then you're going to want to walk through the troubleshooting portion of the lab to find out where those functions are and how you can use them. So let's get you set up in lab. So let me flip over actually to my browser here. And I'll close this out. First things first, if you need more screen real estate when you get into the labs, You can go ahead and expand that. Now this is going to make my lab a little bit big here. And I want to point out that you want to wait until the lab shows this green status in the window that says the lab status is ready. From here, go ahead and open up Chrome and use the vRealize operations link. So I want to point out that in the hands-on lab environment, we're going to be using the VIDM source. So go make sure if it's not selected to change it over to the VIDM auth source and hit redirect. Now it's going to bring you to the Workspace ONE portal for a username. Make sure you use the HOL admin with the universally defaulted VMware OneBang password to log in. And wherever you are in the modules, you can start with any module within the lab, but login will always be identical. So make sure you use the VIDM auth source and use HOL admin as the username to log in. So module 1 is going to take you through a description of this screen here. It's going to take you through these major item categories. We call it the navigation menu at the very top. These are the major categories that most customers are going to mostly be navigating from. And then we talk briefly about these little links on the left-hand side. So when we go through module 1, we go ahead and we talk about what the dashboards look like and how this is categorized and how you can find the various dashboards in order to view based on what part of the virtual infrastructure you want to be able to get some insight into. There's also the alerts function. This is very useful for if you want to be monitoring your environment to see if there are any changes and to notify you instead of going into the interface all the time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the alerts also in module 1. Environments is an oddly kind of set up interface here. Oftentimes, this particular module is going to walk you through the vSphere, finding the vSphere clusters, because all of your vCenters would be connected here, but where would you find them represented? And this is where we come into this environment and navigate through the inventory tree view, and suddenly you'll see something very, very similar to what you see in vCenter. So you can see this is how we can see a number of the objects that you have in vCenter and view how Operations Manager interprets the data from vCenter and provides you a different view of how that piece of infrastructure is actually behaving and how it's doing. So you can see here, I've selected the ESXi host, and it's showing all the immediate alerts. It's showing the capacity remaining, all the key metrics that you're looking for to see how this host is behaving, such as CPU usage, memory usage, etc. And you can see right off the bat how it's doing. Administration is going to be the administration of vRealize Operations Manager itself. And so the menus on the left-hand side are going to be the ones where if you need to change costing metrics or you want to connect to different accounts and manage different environments, the administration setting will be where you navigate to. Now, once we've gone through the top menu items, we're going to come home and I talk a little bit about these different pillars that we have here. We call them pillars because we're basically grouping the function of Operations Manager into various columns here with that functionality grouped inside these categories. So we find out a lot of customers will go for optimizing performance, looking for right sizing their VMs to make sure which VMs are might have too many CPUs and not using that many CPUs, or perhaps you have some VMs that are undersized. So these are the different pillars in which we've categorized those functions. Optimized capacity is where you want to bring back some of that. Troubleshoot is going to be where we're going to look at these virtual infrastructure components, larger components, and see how they're doing according to vRealize Operations Manager. And then managed configuration is really a part of compliance in configuring how you want to view some of this. So on the left-hand side here, we have this collapsible menu, because depending on where you are inside Operations Manager, you may need some of these shortcuts. So I'm going to go to workload optimization just as an example. And we've now left the main pillar screen and navigating down into the various dashboards and functionalities. And you know, if you're looking for a quick shortcut to get back or to find another functionality, some of the links are here on the left-hand side. So from here, I can navigate straight over to optimize capacity and what if analysis. So this is how you can use some of these shortcuts on the left-hand side to navigate and jump in between the various functions and dashboards within vRealize Operations Manager. We can also go right back to what we refer to as quick start homepage, where we're back to the various pillars. So from a module 1 standpoint, those are the various screens that we're going to be walking you through and introducing some of the highlights of how our customers use that. So moving on to module 2, we look at performance tuning. And before I continue, let me go ahead and just point out that if you open up the table of contents, you will see all the modules laid out in order. And if you expand the modules, it will show you exactly which sections are covering what topics. So if you come into Operations Manager, you know, in the future, you need to revisit something and you know you're looking for something very specific, you can open up the table of contents and navigate just to that particular function. Okay. So the performance tuning portion of this lab is, I actually had to put it in a simulation because, as I previously said, the data there's not enough data inside this on-demand instance of vRealize Operations for me to do some of the optimized performance exercises. So you can watch the simulation and try and find some data there is in the lab and run it, but I don't think it's consistently enough, because we do come into, I believe it was the right size, and sometimes it just doesn't show up properly. All right, so let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about Module 3. So Module 3 is going to bring you to the capacity and cost management portion of this particular lab. And when we come over to optimize capacity, you're going to see that there is a number of what-if analysis scenarios here. And we're going to bring you through the traditional workload planning, where we add VMs. And here you can go ahead and put in scenarios and select any one of the environments that we have in this particular lab. One of the things that is very interesting about Operations Managers, you don't have to randomly put in figures. you can actually take maybe a current VM, and I will go ahead and just pick one VM from your current. Apparently I did not select that. There we go. So you can take a current VM that you're using. Perhaps you need a number of those VMs duplicated, and you can go ahead and add them. And here I can change the quantity. Okay. And we can put in dates as we need to. And we can go ahead and actually save this scenario. And then run it after the fact as well. And this is going to show us whether that workload is going to fit into the cloud that I have selected. And clearly in this instance, the environment I have chosen will not support that. And there's some recommendations for public clouds. So this is how you can run scenarios, and you can run multiple scenarios, whether that's adding hosts and adding workload. So that's just an example. This is really fun to do inside Operations Manager. So go ahead and try different things. You can pump in numbers that you are using or you want to test out just to see how the interface comes back and delivers that. And this is an example of why Operations Manager is very powerful inside your virtual environment. Now imagine Operations Manager connected to your vCenter and knowing what your vCenter capacity and resource metrics are. If it knows your metrics and it knows your environment, you can go ahead and model a lot of these workloads out. If you have a group, a business division that's asking you, hey, we've got to add 50 VMs, or we're looking at adding this application, we're going to make a certain investment. Can your infrastructure support it? And if it can't, how much do you need from a resource standpoint for us to commit to grow the environment to house that application? All of those scenarios can be done within Operations Manager, and you can comfortably tell them, well, based on the workload that you currently have or the workload that you are planning, we can see how we need to add host resources, etc., to the virtual infrastructure to house your new application. So this is a very powerful tool, very useful for tech refreshes and, like I said, adding of applications. Okay, so let's see. Module 4 is troubleshooting. And troubleshooting is pretty near and dear to my heart, because troubleshooting, if you're running a data center, is key. It's hard to understanding whether you can fix something quickly. And that is a big deal. So I'm going to go straight to the host dashboard. So this is a great way of taking a look at whether this host is overburdened. So you come into the troubleshooting section, you select the host, and it's going to bring you up to the ESXi contention dashboard. So in this instance, we're connected to a vCenter that has two groups. One is management and one is workload. I'm going to go ahead and select one of the hosts from the workload cluster. And you can see on the right-hand side, Operation Manager now gives us a number of graphs depicting the metrics associated with this particular host and what it has looked like in the past, looks like the past 24 hours here, of how this host has been experiencing. And so this will help give you a quick temperature check, or this is the last 6 hours. We can go last 24 hours. I'm not sure if it's going to populate the data because, yeah, it's an on-demand environment, but we can go. But as you can imagine, the longer you have Operations Manager, the further back you're going to be able to go and look at the data and see how it's been performing. And that's often useful for folks trying to understand when they're having their peaks and when they're having their valleys. What's the demand on their infrastructure at different times of the month, of the week, of the year. So coming back to the dashboard, we can also do this for VMs. So let's go home and let's go over to VMs. and we're going to select one region. Oops, didn't mean to select the region. We're going to select one of the regions. And a lot of the operations manager interfaces, the dashboards, will be very similar in that it will show you one main widget, which has the high level objects. Now you gotta be careful. If you click on the name, it's gonna take you to the object itself and then show you the metrics. In this instance, we kind of want to see the metrics that are related to that object. So we click on the row and not the object name itself. Okay, and that's what's going to happen is the operations manager is going to go ahead and populate the metrics in the other widgets is what we call them. And suddenly you see for that particular data center, you see the amount of CPU readiness, which VMs are the highest consumers of resources, and etc. And that this is going to give you, and if I click on this particular VM, it will further populate the widgets on the right-hand side, showing you the metrics related to that particular VM. And so that's going to give you a really great high-level overview of the environment and allow you to drill down into the objects of interest. But that allows you to have some contextual awareness of overall how the infrastructure is doing. And then as you go down into the VM, you can take a look at how the VM is respective of the overall environment. And this is actually where we're going to go ahead and end my speaking session, because that takes you through the first 4 modules. So I hope you enjoy the time with the lab. I hope it gives you some valuable techniques to work with Operations Manager. And thank you for coming.